Hey, Shalom Makiam, this is Ariella. First off, I want to give all praise and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai. Once again, I want to give all praise and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai. I want to send double honor to Apostle and Elders, a great millstone, peace, love, and salutation to all you Akiam out there kicking the word in sincerity and truth. And I just wanted to add a little bit to the sit down that we had all did on eunuchs and that Yahshua expounded upon in the sit down that you guys see here up on the page. And I wanted to reiterate something just for people so that, you got guys out here that want to be simple. I want to reiterate a point that we're going to read here in the Xenophon's Pictorial Bible Dictionary. We read this in the sit down, but I just want to kind of highlight it and go over it again to make a point about eunuchs and about how a eunuch is a person that did have their genital cut off, but it became a label or a term for someone who was a magistrate, a minister, or an official in these kingdoms, in these empires. So you would have people come and be sold as eunuchs, as a group of young men, be sold as eunuchs to serve to serve under the king, but they wasn't necessarily castrated. So let's go over this one time real quick. I'm going to read through this, and then we're going to make a few points here in the scriptures. Lord willing, this is not going to take long, but I just want you brothers to kind of hang on with me, pay attention, and make points on the comment boards if you would like. All right, so it says right here in the Xenophon's Pictorial Bible Dictionary, eunuch. It says a castrated male from the employment of such men as custodians for royal harems. The term came to designate an officer. The term came to designate an officer, whether physically a eunuch or not. All right. In the Hebrew, you had the Sarayas, translated officer 12 times in the scriptures. It was in Genesis 37:36, 39:1. It says a married man. It says it was translated as chamberlain 13 times, and it was translated as eunuch 17 times. Okay, then it gives a list of the scriptures where it was used as eunuch. Then it goes down as you read. It says of the last kings of Judah. Then it talks about 2 Kings 20:18, which we'll get. Isaiah 39:7, Daniel 1:3-18. In service of heathen kings. In service of heathen kings. Okay. And that was the place of Daniel in the Babylonian kingdom. He was in service of a heathen king. He wasn't physically castrated. He was in service of this king, because a eunuch, by having his male parts cut off, was emasculated and made to seem, and they were known for their absolute loyalty to their masters. Okay, and like we made an example, we talked about how there's an example of that on this show called Game of Thrones, how this guy was captured from another kingdom, tortured, castrated, and he became a servant to the prince. Right.
Please, mercy, mercy.
This is mercy. I'm not killing you, just making a few alterations.
No, 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 please, no,
Oh, it does what like. You had a good sized cock. What? No. Pork sausage. You think I'm some sort of savage? People talk about phantom limbs. An amputee might have an itch where his foot used to be. So I've always wondered, do eunuchs have a phantom cock? Next time you think about naked girls, when you feel an itch. Sorry. I shouldn't make jokes. My mother taught me not to throw stones at cripples. But my father taught me to aim for their head.
Kill me.
What?
Kill me.
A little louder.
Kill me!
You're no good to me dead. We need you. You don't look like a Theon Greyjoy anymore. That's a name for a lord. But you're not a lord. You're just meat. Stinking meat. You reek. Reek! That's a good name for you. What's your name?
Theon Greyjoy.
What's your name?
Theon Greyjoy.
What is your name?
Reek. My name is Reek.
Right? And that became common enough to where even men that were not castrated were still called eunuchs. Okay? When you keep reading, it says, the Mosaic law forbade those blemished by castration to enter into the congregation, Deuteronomy 23:1. But Isaiah prophesied of a day when this disability would be removed and their loss compensated. Talking about Isaiah 56:3. You see how they broke that down erroneously? Because here they would tell you that the stranger is a literal heathen. Just like they would tell you that the eunuch is a literal eunuch. Well, we know that the stranger isn't a literal heathen or a literal Gentile. It's an Israelite foreigner. All right? It's just same thing as eunuch. So if eunuch is talking about, if stranger is talking about a literal heathen, then you would say the same thing for eunuch. But since we, through the spirit of Yahweh Shem Yahushua, we know that's not the case. It's not talking about you have to have your balls cut off. Okay? So you can keep reading that if you like. I'll have that posted. Real quick, I want to go here to the book of Daniel, the 1st chapter and the 3rd verse, and just make some points. When you read here, it says, and the king spake to Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom. In order to be skillful in all wisdom, they have to be of some type of age, okay? And cunning in knowledge and understanding science. Because if the king wanted to call on one of these men from another nation to get their ideas, their point of views, and their expertise on a particular subject, they would have to have some knowledge. All right? And that's what Daniel was brought for. These were children who were considered the cream of the crop of the Israelite nation. Okay? They weren't meant to be castrated. They were meant to come as officers to the court that could tell the king about the said lands and the said customs, so the king could have more knowledge in his rulership. This person can speak Hebrew, so he can use this person to delegate tasks amongst the Hebrews. You understand that? That's why the king would bring people from different lands and train them up in the ways of the Chaldeans, but he would rule over them. Okay? When we continue reading in verse 4, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Now, just to make a point, I want to go here in Daniel to this word. When you look up this word eunuch, we talked about kareas, that word kareas, eunuch, and how it can mean officer. Just for the point of edification, look this up in the lexicon. A eunuch, one castrated, such as the eastern kings were accustomed to set over the care of their women and the offices of the court. Daniel 1 and 3 here. The prince of the eunuchs was over royal children, just as now in Turkey. Read down, any minister of the court, although not castrated. Okay, and then it says here, although it's difficult to determine in what places the primary meaning of the word is preserved. So really, through the Spirit, you have to understand what it's talking about. In the Spirit, you have to understand where to go to. So just to make a quick point, let's go here. Daniel 1 and 3, just so you can see. Let's get the NIV and see what it says. Daniel 1 and 3. And the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials. You see that? To bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. Okay? Because you're not going to bring on a 7-year-old boy that don't know a goddamn thing. They wanted people that understood and knew the culture of their lands, science, mathematics, the prophecies from the spiritual aspect. That's what Nebuchadnezzar wanted. The creme de la creme of the nations that he was conquering, to help aid him in ruling over all those different nations. Okay? Just as a point of reference. Well, you know what? NIV, well, you know, we can use a New American Standard Bible Version. We'll show you too when you read Daniel 1 and 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, because Daniel was high up in those families. Okay, most likely trained in the school of the prophets and raised up as a top guy. All right, so let's go to the prophecy in 2 Kings 20 and 17. It says, "Behold, the days come, that all that in thine house and that which thy fathers have laid up in store unto this day shall be carried into Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord." Satan. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. Verse 18, 2 Kings 20:18. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Right? That same word, kareas. All right. If you was just to click and go to the NIV real quick, just as a point, and some of your sons who shall issue from you, whom you will beget, will be taken away and will become officials officials in the palace of the king of Babylon. Okay? Just because that word and that term became synonymous, man. For anybody who was captured and brought into the king's court, they were called eunuchs. Do you see that? Does that make sense? Daniel was an official in the king's court. He was sold as a eunuch. Doesn't mean that he was castrated, because it doesn't make sense. Alright? After a certain amount of time, it doesn't even make sense to castrate him anyway. Okay? He wasn't a threat in that nature to the king. And he definitely wasn't over the harem. He wasn't over the hoes. He was brought to be a wise counselor unto King Nebuchadnezzar, okay? Just like Joseph, just like Moses, just like Nehemiah, just like Zerubbabel, just like Mordecai. Alright? That was Daniel's position in the court amongst the heathen king of Babylon. Alright? So this is just kind of adding a little bit more here, just to say, yes, Daniel was a spiritual eunuch, but he was a eunuch in the sense of the term. But you just have to understand the term. And in order to understand the term, takes studying. That's why the scripture says, study to show thyself approved. Which those guys at IUIC, they're never going to do. Alright? They actually hate that idea because it exposes them. Okay? But with that, man, I want to give all praise and glory to Yahweh, Bashem, Yahushua. Double honors to Apostle Nails, a great millstone. Peace, love, and salutation to all y'all. Yeah, I'm out there kicking the word of sincerity and in truth. Shalom.
Well, hi all my LGBT friends and others. It's my day off, and I've just been having things cleaned up, and anyway, the Lord has been putting in my mind and heart to talk more about connecting the dots with the eunuch, I think. So today I met another neighbor who's Jewish, Christian, and a lesbian. And Joyce wants to get together and do some Bible studies. So I think that's just fantastic, and I'm so excited. And so we're gonna try to get together. We haven't made a date yet, but we will be doing that soon, as some things fall into place for her, which should be soon. And then I'll let you know how that goes. Okay, so be praying for that. I did some of my own writings today. The eunuch in the Bible. It's, the eunuch is mentioned many times in the Bible. Something like, 30 times in the Old Testament, and the New Testament, at least 10 times maybe in the New Testament. And so I just wanted to, the eunuchs that are in the Bible, and the Bible doesn't always call a eunuch in the Bible. They may call this person a chamberlain, the captain of, the army was named this person, but they may not say that person was a eunuch, okay? Or the head of the bedchambers, but doesn't mention the name eunuch, okay? And most of the time, they were homosexuals, or eunuchs, or bisexual men made into eunuchs. Their privy parts were castrated, or they were captives or slaves, or they were made into eunuchs by other men, okay, and so forth, which I'll go over in just a moment. As you know, the leading scholar of Princeton, I'm trying to remember his name off the top of my head, Gannon is his name, believes that the ancient eunuch is most likely today's homosexual. Okay. So in Isaiah 56:3, it mentions the eunuch, and I like this verse, and I'll read it to you. Neither let the son of a stranger, a Gentile, okay, it is a stranger, that had joined himself to the Lord, speak, saying, the Lord hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. And in Jeremiah 52:25, it mentions the eunuch, and then it goes into Acts. I have Acts here. 2 Kings 9:32 and 20:18 mention the eunuch. Isaiah again mentions the eunuch. 39:7, Isaiah 56:4 mentions the eunuch. Jeremiah 29:2, Jeremiah 34:19, Jeremiah 38:7, Jeremiah 41:6, 52:25, Daniel, first chapter 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 18. Daniel 1:9 is very interesting because it says that the eunuch gave tender love to Daniel, okay? And Matthew 19:12, of course, is my favorite, which says, for there are some eunuchs which were born from their mother's womb, some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of heaven. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. Okay, so those are the things that I took out today. And then as I was researching, I came across a website, Homosexual Eunuchs and the LGBT. Let's see if I got it right. Yeah, I think that's right. I think you put it homosexual eunuchs and the Bible, okay? And you will find it. And if I correct myself, I'm gonna, okay, I will. But let me just read this because I don't have that much time here. These are not my words, okay? Somebody else wrote this, and I'll tell you who it is. It's born eunuch / LGBT. Who were the homosexuals in the Bible? Jesus said this, for there are eunuchs who are born so from their mother's womb. There are eunuchs who are made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. To him who can comprehend, that is enough. Matthew 19:12. Lamsa. The Aramaic word for it's plural, is ma-hem-ni, is translated as eunuchs here, but literally means the trusted ones, faithful ones, and believers. These trusted ones were also servants such as chamberlains, eunuchs, and officers. Additionally, me-he-ni meant homosexual men because they were trusted around women that were married and were not of their family. They weren't a threat in committing adultery with other men's wives or having premarital sex with the women of the nation. The born eunuchs in the above verse from Matthew are referring to homosexual men. The second part of the verse says that there are eunuchs who are made eunuchs by men. These would be the man-made castrated eunuchs. Also the eunuchs who are made eunuchs by men were those appointed by the king to the servants in the king's palace. Some of these were prisoners of war, captives, and exiles, Isaiah 39:7, Lamsa. And this part of the verse should be read as, and there are believers who made themselves celibates for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Throughout the ancient nations that included Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, and Persia, homosexuals were exalted to such positions as eunuchs that watched the women of the harem. Because of the mistrust of men, Heterosexual or bisexual men were castrated, but homosexual men didn't need to be. Eunuchs also had a recognized place in homosexual prostitution, and youths chosen as catamitic favorites were sometimes castrated. Homosexuality, as long confused with eunuchry, eunuchry, like effeminacy and hermaphroditism, eunuchry were sometimes thought of as creating a woman-man. The following verses will show that the Bible defines the trusted ones or eunuchs as homosexual men. Now God had brought Daniel in favor and tender love with the prince, Sar, ruler, captain of the eunuchs. I've mentioned this before in other videos. Sar was used in the Hebraic, okay, language. Daniel 1:9 of the KJV. The first underlined word is from Hebrew word khe-sed, Khe-esd, which means lover, loving kindness, mercy, and favor, and is translated as favor in this verse. The second underlined word is from the Hebrew word ra-kha-mim, which is translated as tender love here, but means love. Daniel was given favor and love in the presence of the prince of the eunuchs. Most likely, the intimate word ra-kha-mim, meaning love, was given to Daniel because he was handsome. And he was. Everybody says Daniel was really handsome. A second evidence where the Bible shows that eunuchs are gay men is in Daniel 14:2 of the New American Bible, which says Daniel was king's favorite and held in higher esteem than any of the friends of the king. In the Aramaic Old Testament, the word friends is replaced with the Aramaic word Ramah, which means lovers of him, i.e. the king. Ramah is from the singular Aramaic word Ramah or ra-kha-mim, which means love. Chapters 13 and 14 in the Catholic canon of Scripture, the Aramaic Old Testament contains 14 chapters of Daniel. The Aramaic text of Daniel also has the Song of the Three Children, or Prayer of Hananiah and his companions, Aramaic name for that portion. After verse 23 of chapter 3, Dr. Lamsa, being a Protestant, just left out the additional parts of Daniel and Esther, plus the deuterocanonical books of Dr. Lamsa, did insert an extra sentence in verse 23 that's not in the Masoretic text, but in the Aramaic and Greek text of Daniel. People, okay. The translators of the New American Bible translated the Greek word, sorry, I hope that thing doesn't interfere with my video. Okay. The translator of the New American Bible translate the Greek word symbolites as favorites, but that is incorrect. Symbiotes, according to Liddell and Scott, means the one who lives with companion. That matches the Aramaic text, which says that Daniel was living with the king. Ooh! The additional words or texts found in the Old Testament book of Daniel in both Aramaic and Greek texts are probably not inspired. Included in this verse of the Aramaic text to show that an Aramaic speaker would have understood eunuchs to be active homosexual men, as they were often the king's lovers. Boga or Bagag's Greece pronunciation was the eunuch lover of Darius the Persian and eventually became lover of Alexander the Great. There is a good reason to believe that the so-called deuterocanonical books are inspired, or at least most of them, but no good reason to believe the additions to Esther and Daniel are inspired. These additions are not in the original Hebrew text of either Esther or Daniel. The following shows where Saras appears in the Bible, since it isn't always translated as eunuch in the English Bible like it is in the Greek Bible. Okay, Saras meaning eunuch, meaning homosexual. Okay, In the Hebrew Old Testament, the word saras is translated two ways. In the NKJV Old Testament, it is translated as eunuch and officer. The KJV also translated saras as the chamberlain. Can't speak today. It is also left untranslated with the additional word as Rabbi Saras in the KJV, which means the chief eunuch. The Hebrew word saras is translated as Mahemna in the Aramaic Old Testament, with the exception of two places which are in bold print below. Dr. George Lamsa translated the word Mahemna as officer and eunuch in his English translation of the Aramaic Bible, the Old and New Testaments. The following shows that the words saras and Mahemna appear in the Bible. In the Old Testament, which I've already said some of it, Genesis 37, 36, 39, 1, 40, verse 2, 40, verse 7, 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 15, 1 Kings chapter 22, 9, 2 Kings chapter 8, 6, chapter 9, 32, chapter 18, 17, chapter 20, 18, chapter 23, 11, chapter 24, 12, chapter 24, 15, and so forth. I mean, it's mentioned many, many times in the Old Testament. And so that's the end of this, really. And I just wanted to share this with you to show you, because we have to make ourselves approved before God, okay, that the ancient eunuch, the ancient saras, is today's homosexual. So enjoy your weekend. Be blessed. Know that you are a blessing. Okay, bye-bye.
As we moved south and east, Alexander often returned the lands we conquered to their defeated kings, so as to make them allies. But this did not sit well with the army. We began to wonder, were we here for riches, or had Alexander, on some remorseless and crazed quest to imitate the glory of Heracles, forgotten them? One thing an army knows quickly in their bones is which way the gods are blowing.
To be God! And to my mother's god, Dionysus. Who we're told by our Indian allies traveled here before Heracles, some 6,000 years ago, to a hero.
The Book of Daniel. The story is set right after Babylon's first attack on Jerusalem, and they had plundered the city and its temple and taken a wave of Israelites into exile. Among them were 4 men from the royal family of David: Daniel, who's later named Belteshazzar, and his 3 friends who you probably know by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This book tells of their struggles to maintain hope in the land of their conquerors. The book's design seems pretty simple at first. Chapters 1 through 6 contain stories about Daniel and his friends in Babylon, while chapters 7 through 12 contain the visions of Daniel about the future. But this 2-part shape is made even more interesting by another design feature, and that's the book's language. It begins in Hebrew, the language of the Israelites, but chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic, a cousin language to Hebrew spoken widely among the ancient empires. But then in chapters 8 through 12, it goes back to Hebrew. This design shows how chapters 2 through 7 are a coherent section, but it also highlights the importance of chapters 2 and 7 for understanding the later chapters of the book. Let's just dive in. Chapter 1 introduces the basic tension of the first half of the book. Daniel and his friends, they're really wise and capable, and they're recruited to serve in the royal palace of Babylon. But they're pressured to give up their Jewish identity by living and eating like Babylonians and violating the Jewish food laws found in the Torah. So they refuse, and they choose faithfulness to the Torah, and it puts them in danger. But God delivers them, and they end up being elevated by the king of Babylon. After this begins the Aramaic section, which you'll see has this really cool symmetrical design. So first, the king of Babylon has a dream that, it turns out, only Daniel is able to interpret. It's about a huge statue made of 4 types of metal, and it symbolizes a sequence of kingdoms, and the head is Babylon. But then a huge rock comes flying in, and it shatters the statue, and it becomes this huge mountain. Now, this dream is the first of many symbolic visions in the book, and this one introduces the basic storyline of them all. Daniel says that the statue represents a train of human kingdoms following from Babylon, and they will all fill God's world with violence. But one day, God's kingdom will come and will confront and humble the arrogant kingdoms of this world and fill the world with the healing justice of God's reign and rule. After this, chapter 3 tells the famous story of Daniel's 3 friends who refuse to bow down and worship a huge idol statue, which, like the statue in chapter 2, represents the king and his imperial power. And so the friends are persecuted. They're thrown into a fiery furnace, but God delivers them from death, and they're exalted by the king, who now acknowledges their God as the true one. After this come a pair of stories about 2 Babylonian kings, the father, Nebuchadnezzar, and then his son, Belshazzar. They're both filled with pride because of their imperial power, and so, like in chapter 2, God warns them both through dreams and then visions, which, also like chapter 2, only Daniel can interpret. He says that both kings are to humble themselves before God, and both kings arrogantly resist. So Nebuchadnezzar is stricken with madness. He becomes like a beast in the field. But then he humbles himself before God, and his humanity returns to him. He's restored as king. This is in contrast with his son, Belshazzar, who doesn't humble himself before God, and he's assassinated that very night. Now, these 2 stories draw this imagery from Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and Psalm 8, where humans are depicted as the royal image of God. He's given them authority to rule over the beasts of the field and the birds of the air on behalf of God, who is the world's true king. But when human kingdoms forget that, when they rebel and make themselves and their power into a God, they become less than human, like violent beasts who will face God's justice. Which brings us to chapter 6, the pair of chapter 3. And this time it's Daniel who's being persecuted because he refuses to pray and worship the king as a god. And so, like the friends, he's sentenced to death and he's thrown into a lion's den. But God delivers him from the beasts, and like the friends, the king exalts Daniel and praises his God, which brings us to chapter 7. It's the pair of chapter 2 and the center of the book where all its themes come together. It's another dream, but it's Daniel's this time. And ironically, he can't understand the dream until an angelic messenger explains it to him. He sees a series of 4 beasts, one like a lion, then like a bear, then one like a winged leopard, each of these symbolizing an arrogant kingdom. And last of all is a super beast, identified as a really evil empire, and it has lots of horns, a common symbol for kings in the Old Testament. And there's one specific horn who is an image of an arrogant king who exalts himself above God and persecutes God's people. Now they are symbolized by a figure called the Son of Man, who's an image for both God's covenant people, but also for their king from the line of David. But then all of a sudden, God, who's called the Ancient of Days, comes and he sets up his throne. He destroys the super beast and he exalts the Son of Man on the clouds, where he comes up to sit at God's right hand and share in God's rule over the nations. We can look back now and see how all of these stories in the first half fit together. The 3 stories of faithfulness despite persecution, these are meant to offer hope to God's suffering people among the nations. But they suffer because human kingdoms have rebelled against God and have become beasts. And so these visions encourage patience, that God's people are to wait for him to bring his kingdom and rule over our world and vindicate his suffering people. But it raises the question about when God is going to do that, and that's what these final 3 visions set out to explore. In chapter 8, Daniel has another vision about the final 2 beasts of chapter 7, but this time they're symbolized by a ram, who we're told is the image of the empire of the Medes and Persians, and then by a goat, who's an image of ancient Greece. And out of the goat come a whole bunch of horns, one of which symbolizes the evil king from chapter 7. And we're told more about him, that he will attack Jerusalem and exalt himself above God and defile the temple with idols. However, in the end, he will be destroyed by God, who will exalt his people and his kingdom. Now, by chapter 9, Daniel is very puzzled, especially as to when all of this is going to take place. And so he consults the scroll of the prophet Jeremiah, where God said that Israel's exile would only last 70 years. So for Daniel, the 70 years is almost up. And so he asks God to fulfill his promise soon. But an angel comes and informs him that Israel's sin and rebellion has continued. And so their time of exile and oppression will continue on 7 times longer than Jeremiah envisioned. Daniel is deeply disturbed by this, and he has one final vision. We're shown the same sequence of kingdoms. It's Persia, then Greece, and Alexander the Great, followed by lesser kings, all leading up to this final king of the north, who will invade Jerusalem, set up idols in the temple, and exalt himself above God. But then, all of a sudden, this king comes to ruin. Now, there's been endless debate about what all of these visions refer to. Many see a clear connection to the exploits of the Syrian king Antiochus in the 160s BC. He killed many faithful Jews in Jerusalem and set up idols in the temple. Others think it points forward to the Roman Empire's role in the execution of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. And still others think it will be fulfilled in future events that have yet to happen when Jesus will return. Now the problem is that the symbols and the numbers, they don't quite match any of these views perfectly. But it opens up the possibility that in a sense they are all right. The book of Daniel has been designed to offer hope to all future generations of God's people. It did so in the days of Antiochus's empire, and it has ever since. This is why Jesus could use imagery from Daniel to describe and confront the oppressive leaders he confronted in Jerusalem. This is why John, the visionary who wrote the Revelation, could adapt Daniel's visions and apply them to Rome of his day and also all future oppressive empires. And so the point of Daniel is that all generations of readers can find here a pattern and a promise. It's a pattern that human beings and their kingdoms become violent beasts when they glorify their own power, when they redefine right and wrong, and don't acknowledge God as their true king. But Daniel also holds out a promise that one day God will confront the beast. He will rescue his world and his people by bringing his kingdom over all nations. And so for every generation, this book speaks a message of hope that should motivate faithfulness. And that's what the book of Daniel is all about.